In just about an hour, President Trump will leave Saudi Arabia and head to Israel, the next stop on his foreign trip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Reuven Rivlin will greet him at the airport in Tel Aviv. Mr. Trump will also meet separately with the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. That will happen in Bethlehem on Tuesday. The U.S. president will arrive in Israel just a few days after sources told CNN that he had divulged classified information to Russia. That intelligence coming from Israel. Now, Israel has not confirmed that, unsurprisingly, perhaps. Let's speak to CNN's Oren Lieberman, who's with us in Jerusalem. Oren, there's so much to talk about. First of all, I'm reading that most Israeli ministers did not want to show up at the airport to greet the president, and that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had to order them there.
And this comes from the office of one of the ministers who spoke to us only on condition of anonymity because of how sensitive everything around President Donald Trump's visit is. The arrival ceremony in Tel Aviv will be much smaller, certainly much smaller when compared to the arrival ceremony in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And ministers had realized, many of the ministers that is, that they wouldn't actually get the photo op chance. They wouldn't get to shake President Donald Trump's hand. So many thought, it seems, why bother going? Why bother going through security and showing up early? So they weren't going to attend. Well, according to this office of the minister, Netanyahu was angry and put out a directive that all of the ministers will be there to greet President Donald Trump. Trump likes the extravagance, he likes the showiness, and Netanyahu made sure they will all be there for that arrival ceremony in Tel Aviv.
I'm surprised because for quite a while, Mr. Trump was the darling of the Israeli right.
Well, not going to the event or not going to the arrival ceremony isn't about politics. It's not in protest of either Netanyahu or Trump. It was just a matter of convenience, it seems. But you're absolutely right on that point, that when Trump was elected, the Israeli right absolutely celebrated his victory. Some even said the era of a Palestinian state is over, especially based on statements Trump had made on the campaign trail, saying he would move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Well, those are all promises that he almost immediately walked back after taking office, and that's part of the reason the Israeli right's exuberance over Trump's winning the presidency has cooled somewhat, now that he's shifted his focus much more onto a two-state solution, recognizing the vision of an Israeli state and a Palestinian state. That's not something that some members of the right are that excited about, and that makes this visit sensitive on very many issues that could come up here.
Oren, as the day goes on, of course, we'll want to hear from you on whether Donald Trump can make any kind of progress at all in the Middle East peace process. But first, actually, since the plane of the president is soon going to be in the air about an hour from now, I want to ask you something else. I understand it's going to be the first time that there will be a direct flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel.
As we understand it, yes, and it's been a bit of a novelty item in the Israeli news media, pointing out that Air Force One's flight from Riyadh to Tel Aviv will be the first direct flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel. That's been a bit of a curiosity here, a bit of a perhaps if Trump can make some sort of progress on Israeli-Palestinian peace, that maybe, just maybe, it won't be the last flight. Interestingly, the press plane that follows the president is not allowed to follow that same path and will have to go through Cyprus before arriving in Israel.
Oren Lieberman reporting live from Israel. Thank you so much. We'll speak to you again, of course. So let's speak to Ben Hartman. He's a journalist and writer. Ben, you used to work for the Jerusalem Post. Tell me about this. When Donald Trump was elected, he was the dream U.S. president in many ways for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister. He promised to be Israel's best friend. He promised to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. He was extremely critical of Barack Obama and his treatment of Israel. But things are a little more complicated than that now.
Certainly, it's gotten a bit more complicated since then. What they're seeing with Trump is that he's something of an unknown commodity. He's been famous for decades, but you still don't know from one day to the next what he's going to do, and he's quite unpredictable. And, you know, regardless of right wing or left wing or wherever a politician stands, for Israeli officials, especially Israeli security officials, what's important to them is stability and somebody who has a steady hand at the controls. And with Trump, a lot of times we see sort of unpredictability, and that's something that, well, on the one hand, he's a conservative like Benjamin Netanyahu, and Benjamin Netanyahu is certainly happy to see a changing of the guard. He's happy to see Obama out of the White House. He would have wanted to see a conservative in the White House, but I don't think he ever really expected all those years to have somebody like Trump, who he doesn't really know from one day to the next what he's going to say. And this last week, with the whole big snafu with the intelligence, the reports that he leaked classified intelligence to the Russians, reportedly from Israel, that's really going to cast a pall over this whole visit. It's had a lot of people talking in Israel. It's going to cause a lot of anger in the security establishment, and it's going to kind of, sort of tarnish this meeting. Now, it's going to still be very positive. This is, after all, a visiting American president, and America is Israel's great ally. It's the country that Israelis admire and emulate and want to be like. And even Obama, at the height of when there was great tension with Netanyahu, when he came, it was a very successful trip, and it was a very warm, warm greeting and a warm time he had in Israel. But the past week, in terms of the intelligence, the reports about the intelligence leak, that's going to really cast a pall over things, and also all the controversies that are happening back home. It's starting to really be reported on a great deal in the Israeli media, and it's looking like
you mean the controversies for Donald Trump?
Yeah, certainly. All the scandals happening back home in Washington are playing out, are getting heavily reported in the Israeli press, and it's creating sort of a picture of a president who's a bit under siege, or a bit maybe not making a great, a really smooth transition into his administration.
And what about the possibilities of kickstarting the Israeli-Palestinian peace process? I mean, no U.S. president, of course, has the power and the influence to do that on their own. The circumstances have to be right. We've seen that in the past. How are the circumstances at the moment?
Yeah, I wouldn't bet too heavily on that. I know Trump has said that he would want to do that. He's put his son-in-law in charge of bringing peace to the Middle East, even though, for decades and decades and over a century, there's been anything but that. It's not really peace is certainly a priority for Israel, but the Netanyahu government and Israel over the past several years has not really pursued diplomacy with the Palestinians as a chief priority. The Israeli approach for the past several years, and certainly Netanyahu's approach, has been more one of withdrawal and sort of a kind of a fortress mentality, protect ourselves and withdraw from the region. And also, we don't really have a partner on the Palestinian side. We certainly can't talk to Hamas. So the Israeli approach has been to put that on the back burner, and there's no domestic demand right now to have talks with Hamas, and certainly Netanyahu's adversaries on the right wing of the Israeli government, the guys who are to the right of him in the coalition, they would not be looking, they would not support any sort of concessions or anything like that. He would really face a lot of opposition. And there's really, for Israelis, they don't see any sort of partners.
All right, Ben Hartman, thank you very much for your take. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.